Good morning, everybody, and welcome to day 2 of the 2021 Virginia Highway Safety Summit. I'm going to go over a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. Please remain muted for the duration of the session. We want to avoid background noises that could potentially interrupt our speakers. Secondly, please place all questions in the chat box. Our moderator will be monitoring the chat box, and we will conduct a question and answer at the end of the session. Lastly, you have free control of your viewing mode. You can change the viewing mode at the top of your screen. It defaults to view everyone. We recommend changing that viewing mode to view who's talking, so you are focused on the speaker. As a final quick note, we will be recording the sessions and will be sending out the presentations once the summit is over. With that, I will now turn it over to our moderator for this session, Ms. Kimberly Burt. Thank you.
Good morning to each of you attending our 2021 Virtual Highway Safety Summit. Today, we are continuing with our second day of sessions, and this morning's session is Persuasive Messaging for Diverse Communities. This session will explore how to use persuasive messaging to positively impact diverse communities. This morning, we have with us Juan Santacoloma, and he's going to discuss how to talk about impaired driving with immigrant Latino communities in Virginia. The main goal is to educate immigrant communities on local laws regarding the use of alcohol and other drugs and provide them with bilingual resources. Attendees will learn outreach strategies for Latino communities and how to address common perceptions and assumptions about impaired driving. And followed by Juan's presentation, we will have Dr. Yolanda Ava, who will discuss implicit bias and its impact. Understanding what implicit bias is and how it impacts our decisions is key to fostering more inclusive and intercultural workplace practices and leadership. The presentation begins with an explanation of how biases is rooted in who we are as human beings. Becoming aware of biases can lead to changing behavior, which ultimately can make organizations more collaborative, inclusive, and competitive. Using examples, stories, and research, this workshop aims to empower participants to define unconscious bias, identify the impact of unconscious bias, and came to the United States from Colombia in May of 2000 when he was forced to leave Colombia due to the threats of the revolutionary forces. Juan began working for Chesterfield County in October 2001. In 2020, Juan started a new professional challenge as the Chesterfield County Public Schools Multicultural Outreach Specialist. He has won more than 16 national association awards. So we welcome Juan Santacoloma with us this morning to tell you a little bit about Dr. Avent. She is our Diversity and Equity Inclusion Program Manager here at Department of Motor Vehicles. She has spent over 21 years working in the field of diversity, equity, and inclusion at various universities and consulting work. Her research focuses on implicit bias, microaggression, and fostering equity in our society. She received her bachelor's degree in history from Virginia Polytechnic Institute and State University, Virginia Tech, a master's degree in criminal justice from Armstrong Atlantic State University in Savannah, Georgia, and completed her PhD in curriculum instruction from Virginia Tech in 2021. We welcome Dr. Avent this morning as well. At this time, we will have Juan Santacoloma to begin with his presentation, followed by Dr. Avent.
Thank you, Kimberly, for the introduction. Good morning, buenos dias. I hope all of you are doing great today. It's my pleasure to share with all of you. I have some ideas and some thoughts I want to share with you. Just give me a second, please, and I'm going to put my screen. So again, my name is Juan Santacoloma, and I am the Latino Coalition for Chesterfield County Safe Substance Abuse Free Environment. And again, it's my pleasure of being with all of you. So for today, I'm going to talk a little bit about the safe history, diverse culture, some messages, and past and current strategies that the Safe Latino Coalition is doing in Chesterfield County for all our communities. SAFE was created back in 1999, and SAFE mission is to engage the community in working together to prevent and reduce substance abuse. Substance Abuse Free Environment Inc., SAFE, utilize awareness and education, community partnerships, youth leadership, and advocacy to address substance abuse issues. The coalition works to create community-level changes in behaviors and attitude relating to substance abuse in Chesterfield County mainly. However, we also have been able to make some connections with Richmond Police Department when we had nice strategies to share with them. And when we are talking about this, I also want to talk about the Latino Coalition. The Latino Coalition was created in 2013, and the main reason to create the Latino Coalition was because in Chesterfield County, this population was growing faster, and they didn't have the knowledge about different laws related specifically with ABC, drinking and drive, impaired driving, etc., etc. And we saw the in some way the obligation, but also the opportunity to educate this important segment of our community. And it is the main reason why we create the Latino Coalition in Chesterfield County. Now, when we are talking about different cultures or diverse cultures in our world, we're talking about Latino, Hispanic, and Latinx, Asian, African, and African Americans. At least in Chesterfield County, we are working with these four groups. And when I say Latino, Hispanic, and Latinx, many people ask me what is the best term. And believe me, I don't care. I don't care what is the best term. And why I don't care? Because usually Latinos have many other situations, many other concerns besides that, what is the best term? Latino means those people who were born in any Latino country. Argentina, Chile, Mexico, Colombia, Ecuador, any Latino country. Hispanic refers to the language. Espanol. So those people who speak Spanish are Hispanics, including those people who speak Spanish in the United States are also Hispanics. And Latinx is the new term, but it is more used on the academia. So those people who wants to use Latinx is fine, but again, it's used more in the academia. People from Argentina, for example, are Hispanics, but also Latinos because they speak Spanish, but also are in a Latino country. People from Spain are Hispanics because they speak Spanish, but they are not Latinos. People from Brazil, they are Latinos, but not Hispanics because they don't speak Spanish. Asian, we need to know what the culture from Asia are. And when I'm talking about diverse culture, it is important to highlight something. If your organization, your agency is asking or is thinking or looking to outreach the diverse communities in your own locality, it is important, it's imperative to know, respect, and highlight that you have multicultural communities in your locality, in your community. I don't want to say that you need to know exactly each by each culture, but at least to be sensitive that these people react, respond, interact in a different ways than a typical American. So keep that in mind. So when I'm talking about Asians, I can say that it is one of the most diverse continents in the world. Just to give you an example, in India, they have around 27 different official languages, more than I think 1,000 different dialects. And I have also here African and African American, because we are talking about two different cultures. African, I refer to those people who are a native African from a native African country, while African American, of course, you know it, are those people who were born here, but they are African American. These people, these two communities are not the same. They have different perceptions, different culture, different sentiments, different everything for them is different. However, they can have something or many things similar, but they have difference as well. Now, when we are talking about messages, we or I at this time, I'm going to talk only about the Latinos. And why only the Latinos? Because this is the field I work with SAFE. I am again the SAFE Latino Coalition. And in order to work with Latinos, we need to keep in mind some tips. And these are the tips I want to share with you. Be clear and direct. When I say be clear and direct, it is easy. Let me put it this way. Sorry. And I said, be clear and direct. Why? Because we cannot hide any information with them. It is better to say to them, look, this is the law in Virginia. If you do this, these are the consequences. We cannot hide to them information. We need to say, okay, look, if you drink and drive, these are the consequences. Maybe you can go to the jail and be arrested. Maybe you can have an accident and injure somebody and or injure yourself. Or maybe you can kill somebody else or kill yourself. So be clear, be consistent, and let them know what happened if they are doing something that is a crime in Virginia. Keep also in mind that family is the most important value for Latinos, and keep family in your messages. I'm going to share later some ideas about messages we used in the past and we are using today to our rich Latinos, because family for them or for us is really important. Also, laws in Latino countries are not as strict as in America. And in some cases, officers do not do what it is supposed to. So, in our culture, it is normal, for example, that people drink outside in public. People don't pay attention about it. And also, many police officers, unfortunately, are corrupted. So for this reason, many Latinos don't have good relationship with the police officers here in America, because Latinos assume that police officers here are also corrupted as in our countries. One time is not enough. Insist as many times as possible. What I'm trying to say with this is, if you are trying to outreach Latinos, and for example, you plan and create an event for them, and they don't show up, or they don't participate as many as you expected, don't worry about it. This is normal. You need to create trust and a good relationship with them before receive the response, a positive response from them. Once you create that relationship, I'm absolutely sure that Latinos are going to participate because they believe in you and because they are seeing you in several times in different events. Use all means available as possible. And when I say this is all, use social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, WhatsApp, email, text, materials, flyer, brochures, posters. phone calls, voicemails, everything you can use is important and valuable. Why? Because there are many Latinos, for example, who don't know how to read and write in Spanish. So if you provide them writing materials, flyer, brochure, etc., you are wasting your time and your money because they don't know how to read and write in Spanish. So at that time, it's better maybe a phone call or a voicemail. Try to use all the different ways and also try to use all the different media available in your locality: radio, TV, newspapers. Everything is important, and Latinos use, in most of the cases, all the different media. And finally, this is an important tip for you. Verify that Latinos, that they understand you, understand what are you telling to them. Be careful when they respond yes to everything, when their response is yes. See, yes, yes. Be careful. Two important things for that. The first one, Latinos are people who really want to help everybody. So if you ask for assistance to any Latino, in most of the cases, they are going to say yes. If you say a Latino, you can work overtime, they are going to say yes. But also the response yes is the easier way to finish a conversation, meaning that they don't understand you. If they say yes, if you ask you understand me, they are going to say yes, because it's the easy way to finish the conversation, and it is because they don't speak English. So be careful with that. When we are talking about be clear, this is the idea. Of course, all these messages are in English, are in Spanish, are in Spanish. But again, be clear, be direct. So if you do this, if you are drinking and driving, you are going to the jail. It's better to give the keys before. So plan in advance. If you are going to the party, you are going to drink this night, prepare, plan in advance. Give the keys to another person who will be driving for you. So be clear with them. Again, what happened if you drink and drive? What's going on? What are the consequences? Statistics. The statistics are really important for Latino, and not just local statistics, outside statistics, that people in your community see what's going on, what is happening outside their own community. Oh my goodness, in Washington, D.C., people are drinking and driving and dying because this issue. So we need to let them know what happened outside their local community. Again, important information for specific dates, specific celebrations. 4th of July, Christmas, Thanksgiving, Mother's Day. And again, if you know about specific and important events and celebration for Latino, such as soccer games. For us, Latinos, soccer is a passion, and we love soccer, and we watch soccer, and we used to celebrate with music, drink, food, dancing. It doesn't matter if our team wins, ties, or loses. We don't care. We don't have an excuse to celebrate. We drink anytime as possible as we can. Again, what happened if you drink and drive? This is happening, so be clear with that. Back in 2013, 2014, when we started the Latino Coalition, we discussed what we can do. And one of the things we start was with this. And the main reason was because, again, Latinos don't know about the laws. And one of the main problems, at least here in Chesterfield County, was that many Latinos drink in public. So we say, okay, we need to create something. We designed these metallic signs to be placed or posted in different Latino stores, Latino restaurants, etc., etc. we contact all the Latino owners, and not just Latino owners, but many business owners, to install these signs in their premises. Most of these signs are close to the main door. Every person we contact say yes, of course. Because this campaign, we were contacted by by Richmond Police Department in order to work with them, as well as to install these signs in many stores, mainly in Southside the Richmond, because over there is where the Latino populations are concentrated. So with this was a really nice strategy to reach Latino and educate them about drinking and driving, drinking in public. Then we use TV. We use a local TV we have in the past, talking about underage drinking. What happens if you, parent, are providing alcohol to a minor, or if adult is providing alcohol to a minor? So we use the TV, basically Telemundo, the radio station we had. We don't have right now, but we did it in the past, and we use with messages in Spanish. Basically talking about what happened if you provide alcohol to a minor. You are going to be arrested, you are going to be in jail, and possible if that Latino does not have documentation, immigration documentation, maybe this person could be deported. Also, we use different strategies, banners, signs, everything possible. And this one was also a really nice campaign. I mentioned before, family is important for us. Family is the most important value for Latino, and we use family in order to reach them and let them know that the family is here for a different reason. You don't bring your family to America to be in problem, to be with problems, to be in jail, something like that. So it is the main reason we use family as a key point to our reach Latinos and provide them different messages. Also, with ABC, we train sellers and service with these two programs: Responsible Sellers and Service Virginia Program, RSVP, and Managers Alcohol Responsibility Training, MART. These programs were in English with interpretation and materials in Spanish as well as English. The idea with this basically was train those people who were in different restaurants, nightclubs, or these stores, these businesses where alcohol is sold, because we found out that in many cases, sellers and servers don't have the education, don't have the training, and they didn't know about what the law said related, for example, intoxicated people who are asking for more alcohol, or what happens if somebody who is intoxicated is going to leave the premises, something like that. So we were able to provide this training to several people, and it was a really success. Now we are talking in different strategies about opioids, and we are using 4 different radio stations we have here in Richmond, in the Richmond area. Opioids, and also another campaign is Do You Know? And basically the campaign Do You Know is related with every drug you use while driving is a crime. If you drive under any drug, it's a crime here. So we use this one, you use TV again, we use YouTube, we use posters, flyers, brochure, everything in order to outreach them. And finally, attend all the possible community and activities. El Juguetazo is a 3 Kings Day celebration where more than 7,000 Latinos attend. Imagine Festival, National Night Out, Que Pasa Festival, Shackley Elementary School Multicultural Night, Chesterfield Hispanic Police Academy, Chesterfield Food Bank Distribution, Last year, I attend all the different Chesterfield County community testing for the COVID-19. During the same time, we hand out materials, information in both languages, English and Spanish, not just to the Latino community, but everybody who were attending the community testing, and many more. So again, any way, any possible way you find to outreach Latinos and or other multicultural communities is more than welcome. They are outside. Don't expect that they come to you, but because it is not going to happen. You need to go outside, work with them, outreach with other people, with other community members where they are living, where they are going to shop, that we are going to meet, laundry, supermarkets, gas stations, every single place you can go, please do it. Because again, Latinos and other multicultural communities, they are not coming to you because it is not normal. They are afraid about organization, they are afraid about government, they are afraid about entities, agencies, etc., etc. So if you are able to go outside and be with them and outreach them and listen, and more important, understand and respect that they are different than a typical North American or typical American, please do it. They are in need of many services. They are looking for opportunity. They are looking for ways to communicate with you, but they are looking that you outreach them because they are not going to come. So this is my presentation right now. I'm not sure if somebody has a quick question right now, and or it is at the end, I suppose.
Thank you, Juan, for your presentation. We will hold our question and answer period till after Dr. Avent's presentation. As a reminder, at the end of her session, we will have the Q&A, and all questions will need to be entered in the chat window. So at this time, we will have the presentation by Dr. Yolanda Ava. Thank you.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Let me see if I can navigate. That's not what you want to see. Get this started. Sorry, I'm just moving my boxes around. All right. Can everyone see the screen, my presentation?
Yes, you are good to go. Thank you.
Okay. Is my camera on?
It is.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. All right, welcome everybody. And thank you, Juan, for such wonderful information. I was taking some notes, so thank you for that wonderful information. And I think so many good, valid points there about communication and the purpose of making sure that communication is marketed specifically for the audiences that you are addressing. And creating that connection of trust is so important. So thank you so much. Just gonna spend some time with you all today to talk about implicit bias and cultural communication. So when we're thinking about how we market our events, it's important to think about where we are personally and as an organization when it comes to implicit bias, which is something that we all have, right? We all have that. So as Kimberly already introduced me, my name is Yolanda Ava. I prefer my pronouns are she, her, hers. I do prefer my name. And I list some of my primary identities here for you. And we'll talk about what that means and why I listed those a little later. But being a Black woman, a mother and an educator are some of my primary identities. And this is just one of my favorite quotes. If you've heard of Eli Wiesel, who's a Holocaust survivor, we must take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim, and silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. So just a little introduction for me. And when we think about bias, bias is one of those things that impacts our daily life. So even if you don't think it does, it literally has more of an impact on what you do every day than your critical decision making. It's like that invisible best friend that you didn't know you had, right? They're just hanging out with you every day, giving you advice, and you really may not even know that it's actually happening, okay? So we'll dig into that a little bit more about how bias actually impacts us and then impacts our decision making. So how are you deciding to market and communicate to your audiences? And it's not just the bias that you need to interrupt for yourself, but does your organization have bias as well? So I'm going to be using what's called Slido. So right now, if you want to take the opportunity, you can go to slido.com, or once I get to the live poll, you can use your phone and put it on camera, and then you can take a picture of the QR code and it'll take you directly to the live poll. But I would love for you all to participate when I have the live poll questions, just to get your feedback and to make it a little bit more interactive. So again, once you go to slido.com, you can do it now. If you type in 814-597, it'll take you to the slides, and they'll be live once I get to the actual slide for each poll. Or again, you can open your camera and then go to slido.com, or the QR code, I'm sorry. So we're looking at how to understand how implicit or unconscious bias, those terms are pretty interchangeable, can influence your decisions, particularly leadership decisions, and identify ways to interrupt. I always list these when we're talking about anything that has to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think it's important, even in virtual settings, that we listen for understanding, possibly redefine your comfort zone. Everything that you learned today, maybe it could be something new and interesting to you, but it may feel a little uncomfortable. But sometimes, you know, that's needed to grow. So we've all been through puberty, for instance, and that may have been uncomfortable, but we needed to go through that in order to grow and reach a different level. So speak your truth. You know, we're going to be mostly doing the live poll here, but if you have questions at the end, please let me know. Being respectful, and hopefully if someone does share, not taking their information and taking that out to a larger audience. And honesty and no assumptions. So hopefully everybody is good with those. Nothing too groundbreaking there. So one of the quotes that I like to start with when I'm talking about things like culture and identity and bias, microaggressions, is a quote from Audre Lorde. And the quote says, "There is no such thing as a single issue struggle because we don't live single issue lives." Right? What does that mean? So when I think of that quote, and you can feel free to put it in the chat, I can see the chat if anybody wants to put their thoughts in the chat. What that means to me is that we have so many different issues and identities that intersect. So thinking about what intersectionality means is that, you know, we could have many identities that show up very differently for us in contextual situations. And so we also have lots of issues that are going on in our lives. And so oftentimes, one single solution is not going to fix everything. For instance, if there is a child who is really hungry and hasn't eaten, and they have to go take their SOL test, and they're also suffering some trauma or abuse in the home, the first thing that they're going to be thinking about is safety, right? And food, right? They're not going to be thinking probably about the test. And if they fail the test, the solution may be to get them more tutoring and get them other things. But the underlying issues may not have anything to do with tutoring. It may be finding that person some safety, okay? So that is in food as well. So thinking about, again, single issue struggles and single issue lives is meaning that we have to look at multifaceted approaches to address things like our identities and our issues as well. And so that may be something different to you, but that's kind of what that means to me. So when we think about defining our reality, I always like to start with just a few definitions, because we really throw diversity, equity, and inclusion around a lot these days, and even justice and other terms. And diversity is just really the composition of difference. That's really all it is. It's the composition of difference. So just because you have representation and you have the composition doesn't mean you're actually doing anything with it. You could just have it, right? So you may get on the bus and sit next to someone who's different from you, but that doesn't mean you learn anything about them. It's not osmosis. That's not how that happens, right? I don't just learn things about you because you're next to me. You have to actually take intent and effort. And that's what inclusion is. Inclusion is that sense of belonging and making people feel respected, a part of the group, and that you're intentionally doing things and setting up your organization to make sure that people are included in decision making, are included and represented at the table to speak. And once they're at the table, do they suffer some of the same consequences or different consequences when other people speak? And then equity is basically being fair and impartial, right? The concept of equity is literally looking from an equitable framework to see where does quality, where does impartiality fall? How do we give people not just all the same thing, but we give people what they actually need? And so this is thought of as a structural or systemic concept, okay? So fun way to think about this is diversity is like being asked to a party, inclusion is like being asked to dance, and equity is having a say in what music is going to be played at the party, okay? All right. So we're going to go through, and let me say, when you're talking about implicit bias, I literally do sessions, like all day sessions on implicit bias. So this is just an introduction, very basic introduction to implicit bias, because there's a lot to dig into. And as you probably know, or maybe have heard over the years, it's boomed in terms of the research over the last 20 or so years. So just want to be clear, it's just an introduction. But we're going to talk about understanding culture identity and how that affects our culture and our values, in addition to implicit bias, and then end with a few communication tips. Okay. So I want to start off with social identity. And so why is it important to even talk about social identity? Well, social identity are all of those groups based on our physical, our social, mental characteristics. So all of the groups basically that you belong to, they could be race, sexual orientation, gender. They also could be what social groups you belong to and how you claim those social groups. We have some identities that are primary, like race, things that you can see or think that you can make assumptions on, right? And then we may have things like religion, which might be a secondary identity that maybe you meet someone and you don't know, right? But as humans, a lot of times we want to put people in boxes. We want to be like, I really want to know. That's just kind of a human characteristic psychologically that makes us feel safe when we feel like we know the answers to things that we're questioning about people. That doesn't mean you always need to know. It's just kind of a psychological thing. So when we think about identity of people, these are some identities I have listed here. It's not all encompassing. And I shared with you in the beginning 4 of my more salient identities. So being a Black woman is very uniquely tied for me. And again, being a mother and also being an educator. So those are some of my identities. That doesn't mean that's all of my identities. I have lots more identities. But when I think about what are some of my identities that affect my decision-making, for instance, or affect how people may see me, how I see others, we'll talk about that. Those things are important to think about. So social identities, everything on the wheel, when we think about generational diversity with age, sexual orientation, ethnicity, gender, and then on the outer side of the circle, you'll see more of those characteristics, right? So military experience. What's not on here, and which is why I added it on the side, is body size and image, which is one that we sometimes don't often talk about when it comes to diversity. Mental health. So they have physical abilities in the chart, but what about mental health, right? Those invisible disabilities. Incarceration status, right? That can be a huge identity that could impact a lot of things in your life. And then previous trauma also can have a huge impact on how you navigate the world. So I list those to say that it's important to think about where you stand in your own identities, right? How do your identities impact you and how you see the world? Because we were all raised in a society, and we have been socialized in many different ways, right? We are socialized around gender. Little girls wear pink. Little girls wear pink. Little boys wear blue. I remember one time when my daughter was in kindergarten, they had a superheroes and princesses day, and my daughter wanted to go as Wonder Woman, and so she went, and that's what she wanted to do. And the teacher said, I'm sorry. She was like, did she really want to be Wonder Woman? Doesn't she want to be a princess? And I was like, no, she wanted to be Wonder Woman, and she is the most precious Wonder Woman ever. So, but the teacher was concerned and really wanted and assumed that all the girls would be princesses and all the boys would be superheroes, right? So again, the socialization, we could go through each one of these categories and talk about how we're socialized, even in our culture, around these different categories. So one thing I want you to remember when we're talking about, or four things, when we're talking about social identity, is that you may be born into some social identities that you have no choice about, right? That's going to be things in terms of, for instance, your race, that, again, you're born into. They could be visible or invisible, and right, they could be stable or shifting. So again, age is going to be one of those things that's going to shift. If we are blessed with long life, it's going to shift as we get older, and the things that come along with that are going to shift as well. So again, really again about that generational diversity. Everyone has multiple social identities, and different combinations can impact people's lived experiences, right? So we could share some of the same identities, but we could also have something different that makes our experiences completely different. One of the ones I think about is geographic location, right? So we could share some of the same identities and some of the same life experiences, but if we live in different geographic locations, how our lived experience shows up and the context may be very different. Society determines which identities are flagged, for instance, and that could mean which identities may have more privilege, may have more power in society, and which differences actually matter. Okay, so and then salient. Salient just means which social identities feel more prominent in certain situations and contexts. So for an example, I listed Black woman, mother, educator, and that's here for me right now today. When I travel abroad, I can tell you, particularly when I was in Taiwan doing a research project years ago, my salient identities changed, and my American status then became one of my top 4. It definitely became one of my top 4 at that point. So context can change basically which identities are more prominent depending on the situation. So again, my salient identities, some would be that I think about often, are being a Black woman, a mother, age, my daughter, or being a daughter to aging parents, body size, health, mental health, and anxiety. Those are all things that are salient identities for me. And I mention this and talk about this because all of your identities make up who you are and how you see the world. And how you see the world is going to be important, and how you provide messaging, right, to the world about highway safety, about alcohol and drugs, whatever the case may be. And so we want to think about, from a self-awareness standpoint, where you are and where you're positioned, and how your lens is developed and how it's shaped by your experiences. So, these are questions that I'm asking right now. You all will get this presentation. And so I share them because these are questions that I typically ask when I'm doing workshops like this: is which identities do you think about most on a daily basis? Which ones do you not have to think about? For me, I don't have to think about being able-bodied. So when I leave the house, I get in my car, I go to buildings, I don't have to plan out, how am I going to get to this access ramp, or how am I going to do something? But because I don't have to think about those things, that offers me a certain amount of privilege in my life that I don't. but that doesn't mean other people don't have to think about those things. They do. And so how do we break down some of our own blind spots so that we can make better decisions and more universal decisions that impact everyone and not just what impacts us? So which ones identities have the greatest effect on how you see yourself, others? Sometimes we go into your earliest memories of those. And then again, what are your blind spots around those areas? And so I think, you know, even for what we're talking about specifically here in highway safety, blind spots is a really good term to use for this today, because we all do have blind spots that prohibit us from seeing some things that others may see. It's sort of like those horses that have those blinders on, right? They can see really well when you point them in the right direction, but they will never be able to see the things that are on the outside of their blinders, right? Unless you remove them. All right, so here we go. We have our first SlideUp poll. And the question is, which of your identities influence your decision-making the most on a daily basis? So again, you can go to SlideUp, you can take your phone out and you can hit the QR code and maybe tell us why. So which of your identities influence your decision-making the most on a daily basis, and why? Why does it influence your decision? So for instance, I'll give another example while we're waiting for the SlideUp poll to fill, is that when I was working on campus and I worked at VCU, as a woman, I can tell you that one of the things for me is that if I would go do a presentation in the afternoon or evening and I came back, I would not walk through the same alleys before as I did in the daylight, because as a woman, I felt for my safety differently. So, so definitely that would affect my decision making on how I chose to get to and from places. So being a father, being a woman, I see a diverse employee, a mother, a mom, a woman. Oops, I'm sorry, y'all. Bear with me. A Christian, a mom. I saw a single mom earlier. If I can move this over a little bit. Okay. Mother, mom, police officer, woman, an employee. Great, thank you all for filling this out. Good employee, being a woman of color, a Black woman. Wonderful. So an employee, okay. Good. Awesome. So when you think about your identities and influencing your decision making, right, it's really important. A caregiver, I see also in there, thank you. It's really important to think about why why does this influence your decision, right? And how does it influence your decision, and what makes it influence your decision, right? So when we think about, for instance, for me as an example, you know, I talked about being a woman in safety influences my decision, right? That didn't just come out of nowhere. There's history and there's context to that. Same thing for race, right? There are when we think about race and we think about how racism has shaped our society, that's another nuance that thinks about how it may impact people's decision. Juan talked about the level of trust and going into communities and why it's important to go into communities, because there could be distrust. Well, that distrust didn't just come out of nowhere, right? We're talking about systematic things that have happened over years that have created that. So we have to be very clear about, when we think about how our identities influence us, what are the other systematic or greater factors so that we can do our best to control for those, right? So gaining the trust before you go into community, telling them what you think they should do, but asking for them and their funds of knowledge around their own culture. So thank you all for participating in that. All right, let's see if we can go to the next one. All right, so what is implicit bias overall? I know y'all probably heard the term before, but it really is the process by which the brain, we have mental associations, right? Which the brain uses those mental associations that are so well established that they often operate without awareness or intention or even control. So we often are operating without even understanding or knowing what's happening. but that doesn't mean you can't do anything about it, right? We can definitely interrupt our bias. And so implicit bias often predicts how we're going to behave more accurately than our actual conscious values. So, for instance, you could say, I really believe in equity, diversity, and inclusion, and you can mean it. But our brain may say, but, remember what, you learned growing up, or but remember in these situations you don't feel comfortable, or but remember all of these other things that you were socialized to believe, right? So, so that's what I want to talk about in terms of implicit bias, is that, again, we could really say that we believe something, but understand that some things you may not be accounting for in the unconscious realm of your brain. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to take a minute and I want you to count the F's. Hopefully everybody can see the whole screen. So just take a minute and I want you to count the F's that you see on the screen. All right. Hopefully everybody's had enough time. I gave you all the same amount of time. So I want you to go back to Slido, or you can put it in the chat if you can't get on Slido, and tell me how many F's did you count? So you can go and put in how many F's you got. All right, seeing a good disbursement of answers here. You all rock. You are rocking the Slido. I'm just so happy with that. That makes me so happy. Okay, let's see what we got here. Looks like 29%. Okay, it's changing up a little bit. About 6. Okay, 28%. So we got, it looks like a good mix between 5, 6, 4, 7. Okay. So 5 and 6 seem to be the top ones, and then we have 4 and like 7 and 3 and 2. So okay, all right. So good mix here. All right, let's go back and actually count the F's. So oops. All right. So we're back to the F. So let's start at the top. The first F is going to be the F in count the F's. So that first F at the very top, because remember, I just said count the F, right? There were no other directions. The next F is going to be the F in finish. Then you see the next F in files, that's 3, okay? Then you see the next F is in of on the second line. And then the next F is in the next of. So right now you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then if you go to the next line, scientific is 6, okay? And then if you go to the next line, you're going to see 7 and of, okay? So there's 7 total. So it looks like we had about 15% of the people who got all 7, and then we had a good mix of 6, 7, or 5, and 4, and 3. So in the chat for me, put which F's did you miss the most? So I see some 4s and 5s in the chat. So which F's do you think you missed the most? The F's and of. Yeah, the F's and of. So a lot of people typically either miss the F at the very top, or they miss the of, or yep, George count the F's in that F, absolutely. And so you all looked at it for the same amount of time. You had very different answers, right? There was a disparity in the answers. Why do you think you missed the F and the of? There's a couple of reasons for that, right? Sometimes our brain, we teach our brain, and if you're kind of, when you're learning to read, we skip over words that are not important, connector words, if you will, that we don't see as important. And so your brain says, hey, this isn't important. Let's skip to scientific, which is a bigger word, okay? It may be the F isn't a hard F sound for some people. So I'm just kind of sharing with you other things I've heard as I've done this presentation with people. So in this activity though, count the F's, it was important for you to recognize the ofs, but that's how strong unconscious and implicit bias can be, that even when you had it right in front of your face, I didn't hide it or cover it up, you all saw it for the same amount of time and you all interpret it very differently. But that's how unconscious bias works. You can have something right in front of your face and still not see it because your brain can train you not to look for something that you don't find important. So how do we figure out what's important, right? You want to know what's important to your community and who you're messaging to. So that's important that we have to remove those blind spots to figure out those things, right? And make them important to us in the work that we do. So again, blind spots, it's just a shortcut, right? To help us make sense of the world. And there's nothing wrong with shortcuts. I take them all the time. Often I get lost and that's okay. But, sometimes it's worth taking the scenic route, right? Because sometimes when we take shortcuts, we get lost. You don't always see all the information. So I really encourage you, especially with your audiences and with your messaging, is take the scenic route, right? Try to avoid the shortcut. That's what shortcuts tend to in marketing and cultural communications tend to get us in trouble because our schemas often fall back on stereotypes. So these are some types of bias. There are hundreds of types of bias, okay? I just list a few here for you today. And I will send an addendum sheet that has a list of, I think it's the top 100 biases. So I'll make sure I share that when you get that information. Affinity bias, right? That's like feeling a connection to someone who's similar to you. Research shows that we tend to give more praise and more reward to people who are similar to us. So for instance, in race or age or other things that you feel similar to someone, we tend to give people more praise and more rewards who are in those groups, right? And then tend to accidentally maybe exclude those who are not in those groups. So thinking about affinity bias, I'll give you an example. If you're interviewing someone and they're not really doing a good job, but you can see yourself in that person. They remind you of yourself when you went to college. They look like you or favor you, and you start to not objectively, or you stop evaluating them objectively on the rubric that you have and start just giving them credit for answers that they didn't say, but things that you want because they got potential, right? They remind you of your niece. They remind you of someone. But what if that person doesn't remind you of anyone because you don't have anyone in your network, maybe who is Latino or Native American or African American, and now you don't have that same affinity bias, right? So what does that mean? Perception bias. Those are just pretty much our stereotypes and our assumptions about different groups, and then how that plays out in decision making. Halo effect, that's when you projecting positive qualities on the people without actually even knowing them. And some may say, well, that could be really, really good. It can be, but it depends on the groups, right? Because if you're choosing to project qualities on some people, again, and not others, it's really called halo horns effect. So there could be a halo impact for one group, but then a horns effect for the other group. And then confirmation bias. Oftentimes, confirmation bias is when we look to confirm our own pre-existing ideas, right? We seek out information that confirms what we already believe. And so that's going to be difficult for you to interrupt your bias if you already believe stuff and then you just seek stuff to confirm it, right? So again, looking at what are your resources? What tools are you using to help interrupt your bias? Are you always just looking at the same types of images and stereotypes for groups of people, or are you looking for affirmations in different spaces of different media and materials, photos, those types of things? So again, just a snippet of the bias in terms of the different types, lots and lots of types of bias. This is what when I mean blind spots, right? So I thought this was a good example, especially relevant for today. When you think about your conscious thoughts, right? These are your conscious thoughts. The car is you. And then we have blind spots on each side. And, you know, these may be your conscious thoughts of what you can see right in front of you, but your blind spot is way bigger than your conscious thoughts, okay? So thinking about what is your blind spot and then what are your conscious thoughts and how do we balance that and interrupt what that may could look like. So I'm gonna show you a video that talks a little bit more in depth about blind spots. So let me make sure my sound is up.
Are you seriously considering her as a candidate?
Just don't trust her.
She's a woman.
She's a woman.
This is a man's job.
He's clearly not educated. Really not. Does she even speak English?
That's not me. I'm not like that. You call it an honest mistake. Science calls it a blind spot. Our unconscious mind is a mysterious and powerful thing. It makes 90% of our decisions without us even knowing it. Our brains are overloaded with 11 million pieces of information every second. Yet we can only process about 40 of them. So we're wired to make cognitive shortcuts, using past experiences to make assumptions. And you know what happens when we assume. Our unconscious mind can put us on autopilot, determining where we sit, who we eat lunch with, who we turn to for advice, and who we choose to offer a helping hand. Living our lives with blind spots can put us in a tunnel. Same point of view, same decisions, same outcomes. We can find ourselves trapped in the land of snap judgments and misconceptions. We've all been on both the giving and receiving end of blind spots. Think about it. Who's talented? Who's able? Who can I trust? Who belongs? We've all been there. Blind spots are part of the human condition. Our choices have consequences for us and the people we interact with. By accepting that blind spots exist, we can stop. Imagine what possibilities exist if we could do it all over again. Different perspectives, inclusive relationships, diverse networks, better outcomes, seeing people for who they really are. People like you, with unlimited potential. We all have blind spots. Once you accept that you have them, you can choose to do something about it. It's time to check your blind spots and focus on what's possible.
All right.
Are you seriously considering her as a candidate?
Just don't trust her.
She's a woman.
She's a woman.
This is a man's
He's
job.
clearly not educated. Really, does she even speak English?
All right. So hopefully that video was able to provide you all a little bit of information and more information about blind spots. So I just want to get your thoughts real quick. If you all, anybody wants to share, you know, what are your thoughts about that video? Did anything stand out to you? Was there anything like, yeah, I already knew that, or that was like, oh, it's a refresher for anyone? So what are you all thoughts about that video? Just want to give you an opportunity to share. So we'll just take a minute and yeah, good reminder. And it's always good to have reminders, right? Because sometimes we get busy and we forget. And I'll tell you, when you're stressed, anybody stressed out there? Can't see you, but I'm guessing I'm probably getting some yeses. Anybody multitasking? Anybody seeking closure? When those things are happening simultaneously, that's when we default back to our unconscious bias in a really strong way because it's really comfortable for us. Yeah, thought-provoking, good mix of actors. Yeah, I can see myself in that video, as he said, on giving and receiving in. Absolutely. Absolutely. Because again, we all have bias, right? Yeah, we have a long way to go. Reality check. Yes, we all have blind spots, thought provoking. Makes you more aware. Absolutely. Thank you all so much for participating. Absolutely. And that's the thing to remember is that, you know, just because, you know, one of the myths about blind spots and bias is that, oh no, I can't do anything about it. It's just there. That's not true, right? So we'll talk a little bit more about that. That's not the entirety of this session, but I would love to, I'll put my contact information at the end, but there's, you know, much more to implicit bias to talk about, but you can't interrupt bias, and that's one of the handouts that you'll get as well. Right, some ways of discrimination, right? So we're talking about bias. Bias can turn into discrimination. We haven't even touched on microaggressions and what that looks like. That's a, you know, a whole nother presentation. So I'll move on. Let's see if we can do it all over again. It's such a eye-opening regarding blind spots. Yes. Yeah, we could, if we could do it all over again. And guess what you get to do every day that you wake up? Something all over again. You get to do it all over again, right? So that's the good thing about changing our behaviors, because that's what we're talking about with our persuasive messaging and with the highway safety. We're talking about how do you change someone's behavior, right? How do we make someone do something differently? And that's a lot of times going to start with us, right? And just because we don't get it right the first time doesn't mean we don't keep trying to get it right, so that people, that we connect with people with the messages that we're trying to get out. This is just a slide that shows again what they were talking about in the video. 10% of what we really make decisions on a daily basis is really conscious, right? We're saying we're making logical decisions. The rest of it, honestly, is that we convince ourselves we're making a logical decision, but it's really based on all of that 90% stuff. How did the person make me feel? What is the long-term memory? All of those things. Oh, okay. So let me go. I am actually, I am a little short on time, and I apologize. So I am going to skip through some of this. You'll get these videos because you'll get this, but I want to move on to a couple of points here. So when you think about blind spots, think about stereotypes, images, and also coded language. Are you using coded language in your marketing based on stereotypes? Like, for instance, are you saying words like thugs and then also using pictures of African-American men? That's coded language. And so be aware of that. Understanding cultural nuances, remembering that marginalized groups are not a massive monolith group, right? That have the same identical education and income, all of those things. So thinking about what are some of the cultural nuances, and some of this takes doing some work, right? Also cultural appropriation versus appreciation. So taking things from people's cultures and just putting them in ads and marketing without appropriately vetting what that looks like first. And so picking and choosing maybe what you like about a culture and you defining it versus how a culture actually defines it. And so that's the difference between cultural appropriation, and there'll be a video in here that I can't show right now that talks a little bit about what that means, right? And then erasing aspects of people culture that may be very important to them, but make you feel uncomfortable, so then you don't include it, okay? So how do we take cultural appropriation and actually make it something that can be appreciative and less damaging and problematic? We're not going to get to that video. I want to just end on my tips, which is create a toolkit full of diverse images. And I have some resources here at the end that have some stock photos. Some are free, some you have to pay for, that create diverse images. Do you have LGBTQ families in your images? For instance, as an example, do you have people with disabilities in your, what does your racial makeup look like? Multicultural consumers tend to be more loyal and responsive to brands that make an attempt to reach them in a way that is culturally relevant. So do the work. Do the work. I can't make it any easier. You have to do the work. Look at the data. Look at some of the trends. Do the work. Create working groups, right, with other community partners or communications and marketing. If you have a small group, you may want to create a professional working group with others so that you can get more diverse opinions. It's going to be important that you have representation in your groups to make sure that you are getting more diverse opinions. And it gives you more steps for people to sort of vet campaigns or things before they go public, right? Because we're all familiar when something hits the public and then it goes wrong, and then you see the president or CEO apologizing because they put, you know, whatever on a t-shirt for whatever reason. So have a diverse representation of identities in your communication and your marketing team. That's going to be important. Language access and translation tools. Do you need that, right? Can everybody access it in the same way? Are there ways that your message can be translated? Juan talked about this earlier. Print, media, social media, all different kind of ways, and understand that everyone doesn't have a computer. There's a digital divide. And so thinking about what does access look like for people, and figuring out a communication plan with entry points for your targeted audiences. Make your information accessible in multiple formats, captions, descriptions, soundovers on your website. Consider generational diversity in your social media engagement. There's a new app every day, y'all. There's a new app. Get you, if you can hire a social media intern, maybe that might be something to think about, but really consider and maybe have a checklist of your social media strategies. But research your audience, you know, look at the available data to understand representation that can be documented, such as your, you know, gender, income. That could be, again, media tools and looking at trends in the audiences. I know I wrapped that up really quickly, but thank you all so much. You'll get this presentation so you can go back and look at the videos. I encourage you to try to take the Harvard Implicit Bias test that tells you more about yourself and your own biases. And here's a question I always get. You can have biases against groups you actually have identities in. So you could be a woman and have bias against women. So spoiler alert there just before you take the test. Unconscious bias in the workplace. And then these are some of the things I listed for some diverse images. Some are free, some you have to pay for. And then a last resource about diverse and inclusive marketing content that matters. If you want to get in contact with me, please do. That is my email address, and I will be happy to respond or share resources if necessary. All right, that is it for me. So I will unshare my screen.
Thank you so much, Dr. Avent, for your presentation. Very powerful message that you've provided. Again, Juan Santacoloma, thank you for your presentation. We're now at the point where we'll have our Q&A. So we still have a few moments that we can go through the chat box. We've received a lot of comments in the chat box, individuals indicating a very great presentation. There are a couple questions that I'm going to scroll up in the chat box to be able to ask to our presenters. And one moment as I scroll through. Great interaction as well with the Slido, being able to use that. That was great to be able to have the interaction. There have been some resources that have been provided in the chat for community relations, police and community relations training that's available. Dana has also provided information on the implicit bias training available for law enforcement. So that's there in the chat box as well. There is a question in regard, Dr. Avent, John Saunders asked if you could explain what microaggression is.
Yes, you said microaggressions?
Yes.
Sure. So John, I'm gonna try to give you the quick answer, but please feel free to email me. I have lots of resources. Microaggressions are those daily indignities that a lot of times underrepresented or marginalized groups face based on their identities. They can be things like comments, for instance, when I do a presentation and someone comes up and says to me, maybe, oh, you're so articulate. I wasn't expecting you're so articulate, or you're not like all the other Black people I know. Or to an LGBTQ person, they may say, oh, I didn't know you were gay. You can help me decorate my house. These are the types of things. Or when you talk louder to someone who doesn't speak English as the first language, right? Like talking louder is not going to make a difference. So thinking about those are things that present for people in daily lives. They can be environmental. So they could be things that we don't see or nonverbal, and they can also be the things that people say. So microaggressions doesn't mean that they're micro. It just means that they happen at a frequency that isn't picked up the same as just sort of overt racism, if you will, and they can create culture. you know, in climate, you know, so when people come out in public and they just touch my hair in the store without asking me, that's a microaggression. So tip for the day also, don't do that. Hopefully that gives you a little answer, but I'd be happy to share some resources more about microaggressions and how they impact people from all different identities.
Dr. Yolanda, let me ask you this. This is Juan. I'm talking about microaggression. Long time ago, when I came to the United States, basically back in 2000, and I started working in construction, many of the people around me, because they knew that I am Colombia, they asked me for cocaine. They say, Colombia, good cocaine. And it was every single day they asked me for cocaine because they say Colombia produced the best cocaine. It is a type of microaggression?
Absolutely, Juan. That's a microaggression. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because I mean, one, there's so many insinuations there, right? I mean, you're talking about asking someone for drugs, number one, which there's you know, what we call sort of a deficiency model within microaggressions, but I would see that as a microaggression. Now, one thing I'm clear is I can't tell everyone what you may consider to a microaggression. For you, you may say, okay, this wasn't for me. I'm just, people are curious. But I would consider that to be a microaggression because you're basing it on someone's identity and the identity of where you are from as well. And stereotypes and all of those things play into that. And I'm sure that got tiring for you to be able to deal with that as well.
Thank you, Dr. Avent, and thank you, Juan, for the follow-up. There is another question in the chat box. This one is specifically for Juan. How much, and this is coming from Dana Sherrod, how much of a difference does it make if the Latino community interacts with a Latino police officer? We are having a tough time hiring any new officers, but Latino and Spanish-speaking recruits are really tough to find. Any suggestions?
Definitely, it is a big difference while interacting with a Latino police officer. First one, because a Latino police officer understand the culture of that Latino who is in front of him. So it is really important for any police department or any law enforcement agency to have Latino employees, Latino officers. How to outreach or how to recruit them? It is a nice question. It is not easy to answer. I know that most of the police departments have really qualified people who work in that field, and these people travel a lot around or nationwide to find qualified Latino people. But I think what one of the problems with that it is that the qualifications or the requirements to be a police officer. So if you, for example, accept people who are not necessarily US citizens, but maybe residents, or maybe those youth guys who have DACA, maybe if you open a little bit that requirement would be better for you. But also it is important that you as a police department interact more with Latinos. Visibility in the community is really important. Usually, police department and police officers don't attend or don't participate a lot with Latino community or Latino events, again, because there is no good relationship between both parties. But you need to create the relationship. You need to create the trust between both in order to hire these Latinos. There are many Latinos who will be happy to work for the police departments. But again, you as a department need to create the relationship first in order to recruit them.
Thank you, Juan, for that response. I do have another question in the chat box as well, and this question is coming from Melanie. For Juan, I believe you once advised that the Latino communities in the U.S. don't normally celebrate Cinco de Mayo. One second, I lost the screen. The Latino communities in the U.S. don't normally celebrate Cinco de Mayo. Does this mean Latinos are not the main audience for our anti-drunk driving message for Cinco de Mayo?
It is an excellent question. Yes, we don't celebrate Cinco de Mayo because Cinco de Mayo is an American celebration. So it may be Mexican celebration, but most of the Latinos do not celebrate Cinco de Mayo. Now, what happened is this: we are adapting new celebrations because we are living in America. So we are trying to incorporate to the American system, to the American way. It is important to outreach Latinos with messages about Cinco de Mayo. I don't care it is Cinco de Mayo, I don't care it's May 3 or May 13 or May 14 or June. Again, use any message, anytime, as many times as possible to outreach Latinos and educate them. Now, if you are going to outreach them because Cinco de Mayo is totally fine because they are going to keep the most important message, not the day, but the message you are providing to them.
Thank you, Juan, for that. There is a question in the chat as well. If you could explain why the Latino groups value family more and how to use this info to reach them.
Yes, for Latinos, family is first. It doesn't matter the situation. One of the reasons, or the most important reason why Latinos come to America is because family. Unfortunately, in our countries, we don't have the opportunities, job opportunities, financial opportunities, education opportunities that we found in America. So it is the reason why people come to America to provide a better future to their families. So keep that in mind. How to use it? Just say, please remember, if you drink, you are going to jail. If you are going to jail, you are going to be in problem. And you don't want that your child will be in problems as you in the future. You don't want your wife has to come to the jail and make all these arrestment and requests and etc. You don't want that your family is in this problem. You don't want that your child, your daughter, your mom, your dad. So use family members to remind Latinos that we cannot violate the ABC, the DMV, drinking and driving, impaired driving, all this stuff. Remind Latinos about how family will be affected if they drink and drive.
Thank you, Juan. There is another question in the chat box from Kurt. Does DMV now have personnel capable of reviewing Spanish language highway safety materials? Moving forward for FY 2022, our upcoming grant year, we do have a grant that we will be able to send materials that are grant funded for review of the translation into Spanish documents. Now, that does not mean that we're going to actually translate it for you. You will actually have to send that in, and part of our review process, we will be able to send that through our contractor to have verified and reviewed for the translation in the Spanish language. But I hope that answers your question. Any other questions? I'm scrolling through the chat box now. Hopefully I haven't missed any questions that are out there. This is great conversation that we've had. Our office, we have made it a priority to ensure our highway safety message is reaching the diversity of the Commonwealth, also making sure that we are being inclusive with our message and making sure that we are remembering equity to reach our audience where they are. We've made it a priority for our office over the last couple of years, and we've built that into our highway safety plan, and we're continuing to making the efforts and strides to ensure that the message is reaching all communities. Education is important along with enforcement, but we do have to get our message down to the community level. And we need to know how to message to the various different communities that we have here in Virginia. So it was great to have Dr. Avent and Juan Santacoloma on this session panel this morning. Great information, very engaging. The comments and feedback that we have received in the chat box, it appears everyone has really enjoyed this session. Doesn't appear any questions are in the chat box now. I want to go ahead and kind of close out. We're right on target for our time frame for today. So again, thank you. We are hoping that each of you can come back and join us this afternoon at 1:30 for our session titled Changing Risky Driving Behavior. We would love to make sure that you join us. You will also be receiving a survey link, and we encourage you to take a few moments to complete that for us. The feedback is very valuable as we continue to plan for future summits and other upcoming activities through the Highway Safety Office. We are also excited to announce that our 2022 Virginia Highway Safety Summit will be held in person in 2022. It's going to be in Alexandria, Virginia, May 3rd through the 5th. Go ahead and mark your calendars now. We're excited to be back in person for next year, and we're looking forward to an exciting summit next year as well. We've had great attendance this morning for this morning session, and we also had great attendance on yesterday as we kicked off the summit. So again, thanks for attending our summit, and we look forward to you joining us at 1:30 this afternoon, and then also joining us next week for our sessions on July 20th and 21st. Thank you, everyone, and see you at 1:30.